legal advice and block the use of hotels for refugees. She also said she's committed to making the Rwanda policy work. Ms Braverman has been under increasing pressure over the backlog of migrants arriving in the UK. It comes after she also admitted breaching the ministerial code by sending government documents to her personal email address on 6 separate occasions.
Some 40,000 people have arrived on the south coast this year alone. Many of them facilitated by criminal gangs, some of them actual members of criminal gangs. So let's stop pretending that they are all refugees in distress. The whole country knows that that is not true. And I am determined to do whatever it takes to break the criminal gangs and fix our hopelessly lax asylum system.
Meanwhile, police have confirmed the suspect in a firebomb attack at a migrant centre in Dover is a 66-year-old man from Buckinghamshire. Kent police were called to the Border Force Immigration Centre yesterday, where the homemade devices had caused a fire, leaving 2 people with minor injuries. The suspect was later found dead at a nearby petrol station. And 3 people have been arrested on suspicion of people smuggling offences as they attempted to bring a group of migrants to the UK. 2 of the men were from Basingstoke and the other one was from Buckinghamshire. A joint operation between the National Crime Agency and the Belgian Federal Police stopped an inflatable boat off the coast of Belgium. 12 migrants believed to be Albanian nationals were also detained. In other news, Rishi Sunak's decision not to attend the UN's climate summit in Egypt next week is being kept under review. That's according to Downing Street. They say his attendance depends on progress being made on the preparations for the autumn statement due out on the 17th of November. Last week, his office said it wasn't expected that he would travel to the event as he's focusing on pressing domestic issues. Now, a warning, all birds must soon have to be kept indoors across England to try to stop the spread of avian flu. From Monday, the 7th of November, it's going to be a legal requirement to house flocks and follow stringent biosecurity measures in relation to birds. The decision extends mandatory housing orders already in force in Suffolk, Norfolk and parts of Essex. The Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs says this year the UK has faced its largest ever outbreak of bird flu, with the disease detected at more than 70 premises this month alone. And in international news, the Foreign Secretary James Cleverly says Vladimir Putin is exacting revenge for his military failures on the civilians of Ukraine by cutting off their power and water. Parts of Ukraine are without power and water supplies after Russia targeted crucial energy facilities overnight. In the capital, Kyiv, a number of missiles damaged a hydroelectric power plant, leaving 350,000 homes in blackout. Several other cities have also come under attack. In recent weeks, Russia has increased missile attacks on Ukraine after blaming Kyiv for an explosion that damaged a bridge linking Russia with annexed Crimea. And here at home, a High Court has ordered more than 180 people not to block roads in London after being arrested at Just Stop oil protests in recent weeks. It comes as at least 2 people were arrested after targeting several major buildings in London this morning. Activists sprayed orange paint from fire extinguishers on the Home Office, the MI5 building and the Bank of England. The organisation is demanding the government halts all new oil and gas licences. That's it. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're with GB News. Time now for Dewbs & Co.
Thanks for that, Polly. Well, I'm with you right through until 7 o'clock this evening and keeping me company here in the studio. My panel, Ben Habib, who's a former Brexit Party MEP and a director of First Property Group. And a new face to the programme, John McTernan, a political strategist for BCW Global and a former advisor to Sir Tony Blair. Good evening and welcome. We love a new face, so we do, on Dewbs & Co. You're very welcome this evening. And I want to know your thoughts tonight. I mentioned at the top of the show the things that I'll be talking about. The migrant crisis, of course. Have you seen the goings-on in the House of Commons just now with Suella Braverman taking to her feet for the first time since her reappointment? We'll be looking at that, of course. And COP27, whether or not Rishi Sunak should go or not. And if he does choose to go, by the way, do you reckon that's his kind of free will, or do you think he's been cajoled into it? And some are saying stronger words than that. And to be a police officer in this country, do you think you should need a degree, yes or no? Some police chiefs are basically saying that this is slowing the process up. They want to hit their recruitment targets. They want new, different ways, in fact, some old, different ways of recruiting. Tell me your thoughts on that. So you can get in touch with me, GBViews at gbnews.uk is my email, or you can tweet me at GBNews. And I have to say, many of you have just been following the goings-on in the Commons. Furious. Lots of you, though, are quite happy tonight, because what you're saying is that finally you're hearing someone saying it as it is in your minds. You're saying Suella Braverman was describing it as an invasion on our southern well, I'll get the words right. I don't like to misquote people. An invasion of our southern coast. That is the exact words that she used. Many of you are in total agreement with that. Just to recap where we are on this, we've had a petrol bomb attack over the weekend. We've had numbers of people making that crossing, passing now 40,000 people this year alone. Ben Habib, welcome. What a night for you to join us, because there's lots of passion right now out in this country about what's going on in the Channel and how do we fix it. Do you think anyone, quite frankly, has got the answers?
Well, I think the answer is very straightforward, actually. We need to stop confusing a deportation policy with border control. And actually, we haven't tried border control yet. We sort of conflate these people coming across the Channel as between being illegal migrants but having legitimate asylum claims, in need of help. But what we need to do is debug the conflation of these issues and look at them in isolated steps. And the first step is that these people are undoubtedly, and there's no question about it, seeking to enter the United Kingdom illegally. If they tried to do it at Heathrow Airport, if they rushed the barriers at Heathrow Airport, it would be the surest way to get a gun pointed in their face by Border Force. But for some reason, at sea, we are unable to enforce our borders. And I applaud all the things that Suella Braverman is seeking to do to try and stop what is an invasion of our southern border. But we've got to differentiate between deportation and border enforcement. And border enforcement is a physical exercise.
It is. And I've got some questions for you on that. But before I do that, John, what's your thoughts on it?
Suella Braverman is clearly one of the most incompetent Home Secretaries we've had for a long time. We've had a series of incompetent Home Secretaries. She has admitted today that she broke the ministerial code half a dozen times, sending confidential documents to people who are not allowed to see them using a private email. And now she goes to the House of Commons and basically pretends she's got nothing to do with the broken border system that her government have been running for 12 years. This is a Tory government's creation, and a Tory Home Secretary has come up with, you know, we sometimes say rhetorically that things are inflammatory. This is literally inflammatory language to talk about invasions, when just at the weekend somebody tried to firebomb. It's inflammatory. Somebody tried to firebomb a
John, they're not entering legally, are they?
It's not. It is literally inflammatory language.
But
and
is
it's
it
violent.
accurate language?
No, it's not an invasion.
So what do you think it is?
It's people seeking to get to the UK to apply for refugee status.
They're doing it illegally, and they're coming from a safe country.
There's a perfectly sensible solution to this, which Suella Braverman won't take, which is you can do the processing of all applications to be a refugee in the UK. You could process it in France. But, of course, Suella Braverman can't do that. She's a leaver. She won't have anything to do with a deal with the French government. A French government deal would be possible, but you'd need a different government or a different approach from the Home Secretary to do that.
So are you honestly saying that you think that this all comes down to Brexit based kind of opinion, so I'm not going to deal with you because you're French and you're in the EU, so therefore I'm going to take it a different way. Is that really what you think it is?
Well, why won't the Home Secretary just to have set up UK processing in France?
Well, that too would require the French to comply with her wishes. And the French have been paid over £250 million by His Majesty's government, forgive me, His Majesty's government, in order to do what they're legally obliged to do under international law, which is patrol their own borders. And they don't do it. It's very simple. The solution is not in having deals with the French. The solution is not in having a Rwandan plan that sort of works. The solution is in making sure these people do not cross into British territorial waters. Well, you put our border force there, you put our navy there, and you turn their boats back. If necessary, you drag them all the way back to the French shore. And if the French don't like it, well, so be it.
The French are interceding boats in French territorial waters.
They are not.
But French and British enforcement officers in the water have to respect and preserve the right to life of the people in the boats. You can't endanger lives. It's an incredibly dangerous place to be interceding in that way. That's why I say put a processing centre in France and no one will get on a boat.
Under the UN...
They'll just go to the processing centre.
Under the UN Convention of Law at Sea, Article 98, which is the article I think you're referring to, where you have to rescue people at sea. You only have to do it if it's reasonable to do so. And I think it is entirely reasonable for us to take a very robust physical approach at our border, having warned these people who are coming there ultimately maybe induced by smugglers, but of their own free will, having warned them that we are going to turn them back. And if they wish to jump out of the side of their boat, or they wish... Absolutely.
It's a death. There's no capital punishment in the whole of the UK law.
It's not a death sentence.
You want a death sentence.
It's not a death sentence.
You want people to be
want
drowned.
robust border control.
No, you don't.
When the Belarusians...
Don't use euphemisms when you mean...
I'm not...
Say what you mean.
No.
No,
John, you're putting words in my mouth. I'm not...
You're the guy who says they shouldn't be rescued.
A death sentence is passing judgment and condemning someone to death. These people...
letting them drown isn't a death sentence.
No.
I get what you're saying.
No. These people, if they choose to jump out of their boat, are doing it willfully.
They're killing themselves.
They should be dragged by their boat. No, it's not heartless. What we are, and people like you, I'm afraid, John, are part of the problem, because you do not see that in order to be an independent sovereign country, you have to have robust borders. You have to have borders that actually define you as a sovereign entity. If you allow all and sundry to come in because you're fearful of enforcing our sovereign rights, you will get an invasion. And that's what we're getting. We're encouraging these people to come over, including Albanians, who have absolutely no risk in their home country. We're encouraging these people to come over because of precisely the kind of thought process you've just articulated.
John.
So, the rule of law is one of the most profound of British traditions. And
I'm not advocating breaking the rule of law.
And we have responsibilities to deal swiftly with anybody who asks to be a refugee in the United Kingdom. The system is broken from the top to the bottom. Cases are just not decided on. If cases were decided
you're
quickly,
conflating the issue.
No.
There are two issues here. There are people who have a genuine right to asylum, and there are people who are seeking to get into the United Kingdom illegally.
Everybody has the right to apply for asylum.
Yeah.
Everybody has the right to apply for asylum.
Anyone trying to enter the country illegally should be forcefully turned back to France. That is the solution.
Do you want to come back on that point?
It just wouldn't work unless you...
Of course it works. The Australians did it perfectly adequately. They had a pushback approach, and it worked.
The Australians interdicted the entire Indonesian network of people smugglers. There was a whole operation going on.
Well, the French won't allow us to do it.
Buy boats and burn them, to criminalise do intelligence work. We have to cooperate with the French. We have to cooperate with the European Union. And the problem is our government doesn't want to sort out its own systems or cooperate.
Border enforcement is not a bilateral arrangement. Border enforcement is unilateral. It's unilateral at our border. And that has to be understood by the Home Secretary and by government. I love what Suella's doing, and I don't think she's incompetent at all, by the way. I think she's the most competent Home Secretary we've had in years. But she still isn't quite getting it. We have to be robust at our borders.
But let me ask you this, though, because there was a lot of criticism, wasn't there? Suella really was quite harsh today in the Commons a second ago, basically about Priti Patel and the process, the progress, should I say, that the Tories had made thus far, i.e. it wasn't good enough. Do you think, because this is an issue, I mean, you can say the Tories have been in power for 12 years, but that's kind of irrelevant because this is only kind of ramped up now. We're talking about the last 24 months or so. Do you think that the Tories have done enough so far? Let's just go back, let's forget the last 12 years, but in the last kind of 2 years to even get a grip of this, or would you accept that actually they've failed and lost control of it?
Oh, I completely agree with John on that point. The Conservative government has completely lost control. And it's bizarre that it should be the Conservatives who have done it, because as you saw in the parliamentary debate, the Labour Party are more fussed about the hotel accommodation these people get than actually the protection of our sovereign independence. You know, so you'd think the party that stood for sovereign independence, took us out of the EU, believes in an independent United Kingdom, would actually have got a much better handle on this, and they haven't. And
let's explore the B word, shall we, the Brexit side of things. John, what you're basically saying is that you think that that is a key component part as to why a solution that involves France isn't happening right now. Do you think Brexit has made it harder or easier to get on top of this challenge?
I think Brexit's irrelevant in this debate. Whether the French and the British, for hundreds of years, for some reason which is beyond me, do not get on. We had a bilateral agreement with the French where we've paid them over £250 million to police their own beaches. They won't do it. They insist on fishing licences, and if they don't get those licences, they threaten to cut off our electricity. They impound our boats illegally in their harbours, and we do nothing about it. The French are part of our problem, and we've got to start forgetting about the French, forgetting about trying to do deals with the French. Rishi Sunak's 10-point plan to deal with this problem involved a bilateral agreement again. It doesn't work. Get on and control your own borders.
And do you concede that point? Because in your world, what you're suggesting is that...
The real world.
Well, you say it's the real world, but what you're suggesting in your real world is that France would be, you know, ultimately deeply cooperative. What I would say is the real world, actually, John, is that that wouldn't be the case at all, because you've seen tens of millions of pounds being spent in the real world. I would argue that, quite frankly, that's been deeply ineffective, barely effective at all. So what you're asking for is closer coordination, cooperation. And, I mean, we're in a situation where, frankly, a lot of these people don't even want to be processed anyway, even when they come to the UK. And by the way, these 40,000 people we talk about, that's just the people that have been detected, picked up and started to be processed. There's loads of people that doesn't apply to at all.
But Labour governments in power have dealt with this issue by exporting our borders. Des Brown, who I used to work for, Des Brown exported our borders to Karachi, our borders to 8 or 9 major ports of entry where an immigration check is done before people get on board any vessels to come to the UK. Dave Blunkett successfully exported our borders to Sangatte. So, you know, British border control starts in France. I'm saying if people are trying to get into boats to come to Britain to apply for refugee status, set up a British Home Office outpost in France, could be in South France, don't care where it is, where you can apply to be a refugee in Britain. And if you don't have a right to be a refugee in Britain, then you'll never get on a boat, you'll never get accepted in the UK.
And do you think there should be...
And there won't be an issue of deporting people from Britain because they'll be in France.
Do you think there should be any exemptions to that? So, I mean, you were just saying that anyone should be able to apply for asylum, pretty much full stop. Do you think there should be exemptions? So, for example, I don't know, if there's a country that is a safe country, should you be able to apply for asylum if you're from that country without an immediate risk to your life?
People have the right to apply for asylum, to invent categories where you are under no threat as a country. We have to deal with the cases and deal with them quickly. And if there's a thin case, it can be dealt with quickly if the issue was resourced. I don't believe the Home Office are resourcing the issue of looking at applications. The Home Office has taken the same.
Why wouldn't they be?
The Home Office has taken the same level of cuts as other government departments. The driving down of the levels of public expenditure have an impact on every single department. And I don't know. I honestly, I think we're in agreement on this panel. I don't understand why a Conservative government has got itself into this situation. That's why I have to think there's some psychological thing about not doing a deal with France because of Brexit, because the UK government, as a Labour government, was always able to do agreements with France. And I don't understand where the Priti Patel couldn't do this, because Priti Patel's politics.
But why do you think, John, that just because they've got the ability to apply for asylum in France, they're going to take the laborious judicial process in a country, obviously, in which they're not happy, sit there complying with the law and not seek to get across the channel in these dinghies? They know that if they make it into British territorial waters at the moment, they will be rescued by Border Force. They won't be pushed back. They'll be put on board and they'll be brought to our shores, and the long process of their judicial hearing begins in the United Kingdom. And with the exception of Manston, which I think is an exception, they get treated incredibly well when they come to the UK.
But every asylum and refugee system in the world has people who apply to it and people who fail to meet the criteria. The issue in Britain is, under Labour, people were actually applied, looked at, sent home, or come into Britain. At the moment, there's broken at every single point under the Tory government. And I didn't hear anything apart from a rhetoric from Suella Braverman that was addressing the fact that we need to process people faster, put people in decent conditions. You shouldn't be a refugee from Afghanistan and have a child and have a risk of diphtheria. That's not British values. We've had to bring refugees from Afghanistan because of the Taliban taking over. Or refugees from Iran, the repressive...
Well, that's an entirely different situation.
But Iranians and Syrians and Afghans are living in these terrible conditions under the risk of diphtheria, and it was dismissed by the...
But this is the point, John. Again, you're conflating the issue. There are two issues here. There is border control, and then there's what happens for those people who make it onto our shores and are subject to British laws, including our human rights laws. And those laws, I agree, they need to be speeded up, they need to be applied faster. You know, I think something like 16% of cases over 5 years old have been dealt with. So that means that 84% of people from 5 years ago are still here unheard of.
We're still waiting.
I know,
still
waiting.
It's terrible, in limbo.
That's what I think is quite an obvious question that we're not really getting into. And I've been told I have to go to a break, and I shall in a second, but I do think this is an important point. If someone is claiming asylum because they're not safe or whatever it is, whatever, why is this kind of notion come about that actually you can just pick and choose which country you want to be your destination? Because surely if you need asylum, you just need to be safe and well. When you start picking and choosing your country, to me, then you've crossed the border into economic migrant.
OK, this is easy to explain. It's not a notion. We set up the whole framework for dealing with refugees after the Second World War, after the Holocaust, after the terror of the Nazis. It's an international agreement. International agreements are really, really hard to make and remake. We made it in 1951. It does need revision, probably, but it takes an immense effort for all the countries in the world to agree. And until you have that, you have to have multilateral agreements like the Dublin Agreement for repatriation within the European Union. There are agreements to try to deal with this issue for the Italians, for the Greeks, for the French, for all of us.
But if you're safe and well in France, why is it just accepted that from there you can choose where you want to go?
It's basically global burden sharing. Most refugees in the world live very close to the country they're refugees from. Syrian refugees live near Syria. Refugees from Eritrea and Ethiopia, they live near, and Somaliland, they live near there. Very few people actually come to the UK. And we need to spend more money doing peacekeeping, institution building, making sure that people be relocated quicker and faster to near where they come from.
Well, there you go. I can tell you, I can keep this conversation going for much longer. I can do a whole show on it, quite frankly. And you guys at home, I am getting much response. I can tell you, lots of conversation you guys want to have on this one. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, I'll be having some of your thoughts on that topic. And I will also be talking about COP27 and whether or not Rishi Sunak should be there or not. And also police and degrees. Do you think you should have to have a degree to be a police officer or not? Ponder that, and I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christys, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for The Briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry, keeping you company till 7, and in the studio with me, we've got Ben Habib, who's a former Brexit Party MEP and a director of First Property Group, and John McTernan, who is a political strategist for BCW Global and a former advisor to Sir Tony Blair. We've just been having a good old debate, so we have, about the situation in the Channel and what on earth is the answer to it. I have to say, I mean, there's a huge sense of emotion throughout all of you guys at home pretty much. And, you know, it's a sense of unfairness. I mean, we've got a situation in this country where many of you are struggling. I know some of you get your pension. There's talk about perhaps the triple lock not being respected. And then you see on the other side this almost £7 million a day being spent on hotels. We've just been talking, John, haven't we, just a second ago about John was coming up with a solution, in case you've just tuned in, of perhaps setting up a processing centre in France to allow this to basically not continue. But in the here and now, because that will take time, so in the here and now, many of my audience are getting in touch and they're furious, quite frankly, about this hotel stuff. So what do you do in the here and now then, whilst you're busy building this processing centre in France?
Well, there's clearly you could move to a faster processing situation now if the government employed more civil servants to do it. We staffed up in lots of areas during the pandemic. We could staff up quickly to do this kind of administrative routine. We need better enforcement because you need to be able to deport people back. I think you need someone needs to go to Albania and do a deal with the government there, which is the government should be able to stop people being taken out of the country to be sent up to France. Albania wants to join the European Union. There's all kinds of pressure you can put on Albania to stop the flow of people coming. But at the moment, you have to. If people come here, many of them with children, if they come here, they do.
You say many of them are children. I mean, come on.
And many of them without children.
Yeah, most of them are not.
People need to be decently and safely accommodated. And because there's not enough space in the existing reception centres, we need to either open more on others of the old bases, army bases and old RAF bases down in Kent, or in further afield in the country, in other places, spread the burden. But you can't let people live in such insanitary conditions that there are fears of diphtheria.
Well, Manston is an exception. Manston is an exception.
Conditions.
And if you look at, I have looked at it, if you look at the sheet that these migrants who make it to our shores get when they land, it spells out a huge host of benefits to which they would be entitled, including medical treatment and so on. And the £7 million a day that you mentioned, which is about £2 billion a year, Michelle, that's just for accommodation.
You've got all of
the bill
stuff,
is much bigger than that. We felt it was too much to cut the basic rate of tax by 1 penny, one of Liz Truss's mini budget items. We felt that was too much. Rishi Sunak has reversed that. Well, that was $5 billion a year. And, if we think there are 40,000 come across this year, you can bet your bottom dollar it's a lot more than 40,000. Since when did the Home Office get their stats right? It's a lot more.
It certainly is. Lots of you as well. I mean, I have to say, I'm trying to find people that agree with the processing centre in France. More people, I have to be honest, are just basically with your idea, which is just tow the boats back. But I guess, how do you stop people then getting on the boats again? Is there some merit in what John is suggesting? Let me know your thoughts. Many of you are agreeing with what Suella was just saying, by the way, when she called it directly an invasion of the southern coast. John says that is potentially inflammatory, especially when we've got the situations which we saw at the weekend, that awful scenario where people were petrol bombing. Do you think that now is a time actually where, rather than using inflammatory language, perhaps it should be all turned down a little bit? Or do you think things have gone a little bit too far for that? gbviews@gbnews.uk is my email address. Right, let's move on to COP27, shall we? Rishi Sunak, let's just cut to the chase. Should he be there or not? Apparently, currently, he's not going to be there because, some might say anyway, he's focusing on domestic priorities, looking at this autumn budget. Is that the right decision or not?
He should be at COP27. It's the end, COP26 was the UK presidency. It's the end of our presidency handing over in COP27. It's the most important issue facing the future generations in the UK is climate change, disruptive climate change. We've got to get to net zero. We've got to take the action.
What are you basing it on, that is the most important thing facing younger people?
Because it will make the world uninhabitable for large parts. If you think that there's a lot of refugees at the moment, the number of people who are starting to be displaced by climate change is in its millions now. It'll get to its billions. If we don't do something, we have to tackle it. But the point is, we should be a leader in this. And what I think is the most interesting is that Rishi Sunak can't decide. So he bans the King, then the King just...
Liz Truss banned the King.
Liz Truss bans the King. Yeah. Rishi backs the ban on the King. The King then goes, oh, well, sod that. Let's have a reception in Buckingham Palace. Let's have a reception for COP. And now Rishi's considering going or not. He's indecisive. I think that's going to be a huge weakness for him as a Prime Minister over the coming months and coming years, is that he can't make his mind up. He should either go or not go.
But hang on, isn't the situation, and correct me if I'm wrong, I thought he'd said, right, I'm not going to go, actually, because pressing domestic issues here, the priority is this country's domestic agenda, i.e. the autumn budget. But
which it should be.
If I can make substantial progress on that and it all goes well, then I might go there. That, to me, is basic common sense.
No, he started off by saying he wouldn't go, and then he changed his line. You either do or you don't go. And it's impossible to believe that he doesn't know what the decisions that have to be made are. Jeremy Hunter made them all. he has to just agree what Jeremy Hunt has agreed, which is actually what the Treasury want. Rishi knows the decisions to be made because he was in Treasury up until the time he resigned. So it's not really new material for him either. But I think there's a fundamental fact about Rishi Sunak as a Prime Minister. We've seen it in the length of time it took him to be appointing his junior ministers. He can't actually make his mind up. He's actually he's known to have been indecisive in Treasury and referred lots of decisions to Prime Minister Boris Johnson to agree. And now he's the Prime Minister. He can't refer his decisions to anybody else.
Well,
that's a very interesting observation. I think the political dimension is interesting. You know, if you have a Prime Minister who says he's not going to go, then he gets a bit of mainstream media pushback, and the next thing he's on a plane. You know, they smell, they recognise that, they think they can push this man around and they'll do it again. And so that, from a political perspective, is very interesting to watch. But, you know, from a fundamental perspective, should the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom be at COP27? My view is not. We've got a Secretary of State for the Environment, Theresa Coffey. She's going to Egypt. If they're all so fussed about carbon emissions, why would you send 2 senior British ministers on aeroplanes burning fuel? You know, Theresa Coffey's there. She should do her job. I don't think King Charles should go. I think it was the right decision from Liz Truss that he shouldn't go. And while I'm at it, I'll just say to John that I don't think that climate change... climate change is an issue. That I do not deny. But the drive to net zero and the way we're doing it is deeply damaging to the United Kingdom. And I think we need a much better energy policy and a much better approach to net zero than the way we're going about it at the moment. If we're worried about levelling up, if we're worried about the economy and the inability to balance our books, the last thing we should be doing is tilting towards net zero with inadequate technology at a cost in the Treasury's own estimates of £1.4 trillion. And that whole thing needs to be rethought through. And so Rishi Sunak should save the £5,000 of airfare to, assuming he's going, you know, first class, to Egypt, and he should stay at home and find a way to, you know, get our economy back on its feet.
Don't you think it would be good if Prince Harry went?
Well, Prince Harry...
That would be the Bant's answer.
Well, Prince Harry would...
Not actually technically a royal, but of the royal family.
But he'd be on his private jet, you know, ferried in with his 2 diesel cars, one of which is carrying his baggage for him. He'd turn up barefoot, he'd look the part, he'd talk the language.
He would talk the language.
And then he'd say, well, I've justified it all by buying carbon credits.
And Meghan would be a star as well.
But what about his point that he's making, basically, where Ben is saying that this whole obsessive net zero drive is perhaps a hindrance as opposed to a help? What do you say to that?
The decarbonising the economy is essential, and we can do it cleverly or we can do it stupidly. I agree with Ben about that. You can do it expensively or you can do it productively, and you can invest in the coming industries. You know, clean steel, green steel. You can invest in hydrogen. There's ways of getting really, really good new jobs for Britain out of all of the whole supply chain. Even starting with the simple things of insulating homes. If you insulated half the homes in Britain that are really badly insulated, you create jobs for workers, jobs for small business, and you also permanently cut people's energy bills. But you've got to have a strategy for it, and you've got to have a strategy that's based on hard-headed economic analysis, but also an understanding that the industries of the future are going to be decarbonised, and that we should try and get ahead in them. We lost our way over onshore wind. All the manufacturing is done in Denmark. We should be trying to get that capacity back into Britain and investing to build the capacity for ourselves and do the really difficult thing, which we've been trying to do since Tony Blair, which is new nuclear. You know, no government, we've made the decisions again and again to get new nuclear, but actually nobody's found a way to finance it, to get the developers and the investors to come in as well.
Well, there you go. Let me know your thoughts on that. Are you a big fan, by the way, of this whole net zero agenda? Are you a slightly younger person and you're sitting at home nodding at your screen when John says that is your key priority? Is it? Get in touch and tell me. Janet, on the COP27 thing, Janet says, well, why don't they all lead by example and do their whole conference over Zoom? That's a very good idea.
Absolutely right.
Absolutely right.
Absolutely. Why are they meeting?
Yeah.
It's just a virtue signalling exercise, isn't it?
Well,
I think the job.
Janet, there you go. We should make you the Environment Secretary. You've got it all going on. That is a very good question, though. Why can't you just do it all on Zoom like everyone had to do pretty much everything else over the last couple of years?
We're doing this in the studio, which is that actually some things are better in real life, face-to-face. And one of the punishments of the pandemic was we didn't get to meet people. So much business in politics and in business and in real life and socially is done at the edges, not in the centre of it. And so if you're not around, it's basically
hang on.
If you're not at the table, you're on the table.
That doesn't wash with me. that doesn't wash with me, because people getting together, I get it, you can mix better, you can achieve stuff, but if your sole objective in life is trying to cut down emissions and all the rest of it, actually getting people to fly in from God only knows where, actually, and increasing things like the emissions, etc., is ludicrous. So, Janet, I think you had a great point, and I'll celebrate it. I'm going to take a quick break. When I come back, if you want to be a police officer, do you think that you should have to have a degree? Or do you kind of sit there and think this whole obsession with everyone needing a degree for everything is causing problems when it comes to staffing in this country? Tell me your thoughts, and I'll see you in 2.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case. Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
We are GB News. And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio,
And online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co. with me, Michelle Dewberry, till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, Ben Habib, the former Brexit Party MEP and a director of First Property Group, and John McTernan, who is a political strategist for BCW Global and a former advisor to Sir Tony Blair. We've just been talking about migration in the Channel and what the answers are there, and also whether or not Rishi Sunak should go to COP27 or not. Someone's just written in, talking about John's idea of having a processing centre in France. Michelle, we built an enormous Nightingale hospital for people that was never used in just a few weeks. So how hard can it be to build this centre in France? He says it's not hard, but he blames the French and says it's them that don't want to do it. Is it, or is it us? Is it Brexit? Is that playing a part in any of this or not? Daniel says, Michelle, your guest on the left is part of the UK's problem. But I don't know which one you mean, because I don't know if you mean my left or the screen left or what. I don't know which one you mean. Dave says, Michelle, you can't let people... I think it might be you, actually, but I'm trying to be discreet and subtle, trying to not hurt your feelings on your first time here. Dave says, Michelle, when people say you can't let these folk live in these conditions at these centres, are they OK, though, with our own citizens living on the streets in destitution? No. There's a lot of people actually feeling there's
bleeding heart liberal, yeah.
There's a lot of people feeling, yeah, but there's only so much money there, John. It's all right saying everyone, but there's only so much money.
We shouldn't limit our compassion.
We shouldn't what?
Limit our compassion.
We shouldn't limit our compassion. Ooh, I can tell you what, I bet there's loads of people watching this, John, that are screaming that they don't have an inch of compassion for people jumping on boats when they're not supposed to, dashing off into the country without being processed, often, many of whom, by the way, do go into criminal gangs. I bet they don't have much compassion for those people at home, I could tell you. I was asking you at home whether or not Suella Braverman should turn down the language she says today, that this is an invasion. John pointing out quite rightly that this weekend we saw petrol bomb attacks. Jeff says no. The language should not be turned down. It is because the language has previously been turned down that we find ourselves in the exact situation that we find ourselves in now. He says this is an invasion, and if nothing is done, there will be violence. Goodness me. Keith says no, Sunak should not go to COP27. And Michael writes in and says, no, COP24 is just a jolly up. Well, I hate to break it to you, Michael. We're not on 24 anymore. We've moved on. Life's moved on. We're on COP27 now. Do keep up, my friend. But I get your sentiment. Right, let's talk, please, shall we? And again, let's cut to the chase. Do you think that you should require a degree in order to be a police officer? Long story short, a few police chiefs, I think about a third of them actually, have written to the Home Secretary asking them to basically keep open the traditional way of recruiting, which meant that people didn't need a degree. Ben Habib, I want to start with you, and then I'm fascinated about your point. In fact, actually, no, I'm going to swivel my chair around. I'm going to come straight to you because I remember a certain man going education, 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 none other than Tony Blair. Yeah, some would say that he fostered this whole obsession with going to university. And now going to university has just become so commonplace that it's devalued a university degree. What would you say to that?
I think Tony was right to say that half of our kids can go to university, and I think David Willetts, the former Tory minister, is right to say that you could see a situation where up to 3/4 of all our kids could go to university. The modern economy is a complicated economy. It's got IT, it's got all kinds of demands on people. I mean, if half of people go to university, I don't see why those should not then become police officers. Nurses go to university, teachers go to university, childcare workers go to university. We need to have higher qualifications. And cops do some of the most, they've got some of the greatest powers over any of us. They can use violence on us, they can incarcerate us, they can take our liberties away from us. And the current level of policing, the efficiency of policing is pretty low. It should be, it's a game of intelligence, it's a game of investigation, infiltration at times of gangs, criminal gangs you talked about. We should have clever people, and if these police commissioners are having trouble recruiting, I would bet it's about police pay, so we should pay the police more rather than pretend it's about them doing degrees.
You say, oh, do you know, I wish I had more time because I wish I had more time because you've got a lot of your answers to things seem to be more money, but I'm fascinated to where this money comes from.
We're a rich country.
But I need to bring Ben.
Yeah, so, I mean, I just quickly address that. I mean, I think that Tony Blair's approach to giving everyone higher education was dumbing it down. You know, degree standards were compromised, entry levels were compromised. So what you got out of the system wasn't actually the degree that you used to get out of the system. And we now see, there were articles recently in the press about Cambridge University and Oxford being prejudiced against people depending on where they came from. And I'm not talking about prejudice of, you know, against those who are hard up, prejudice against perfectly bright, young, school leavers who come from the private sector. But, you know, they're not heading towards excellence. The whole system's been dumbed down. And then the other big criticism I have of Tony Blair's policy is it's encumbered the youth with a huge amount of debt just as they enter the workforce. And I think it's terrific that the police commissioners are suggesting that they should have an entry grade which doesn't require a degree. Not all policing requires, you know, the kind of forensic detail that you were describing. Some of it does, and of course for that kind of policing, there should be other qualifications required. But there's a huge amount that needs to be done at a very basic community policing level, and you don't need a degree to do that.
No, we can have the police community support officers to do that, and we had that under Tony Blair. I think the issue is there is an apprenticeship way of becoming a police officer, and I think that's a good idea.
But it's a degree level apprenticeship.
Yeah, but I think that is right. I think that we should have respect for apprenticeships and say that apprenticeships can take you to degree level. Apprenticeships can have an equivalence. You don't have to go to university.
But you're looking for equal outcomes, John. This is my biggest problem with Tony Blairism.
You can learn on the job.
Blairism.
I think cops should be able to learn on the job, and I think there can be the basic work on the beat, walking around, being visible, can be done by PCSOs.
You see, but I think a lot of young people have been sold a pup. When you say all these things to people, education, everyone go get a degree, to Ben's point, you make yourself quite a lot of money in debt, actually, and really, often, you don't need a degree. What you actually need is the very thing that a lot of students, degree students, actually lack because they've spent all their time buried in textbooks. You need a little bit of common sense, you need a little bit of nous about you, and actually, what's happened is a lot of lazy employers have just used the word degree as a filtering mechanism. It doesn't matter if you've got a degree in, I don't know, modern dance. If you want to go into being a business manager or something, the two are irrelevant in my mind. And I think that a lot of young people have really been pushed down a road that was a little bit unnecessary. I would tell any young person, if you're watching and thinking to yourself, shall I go to university? I'd say, do what I used to call a YTS, a modern apprenticeship scheme. And I would say to employers, pack it in, demanding degrees for absolutely everything. The world has gone mad, so it has. You guys, though, look at the time, everyone. It's almost time for us to say goodbye. Sean says, of course, police should have a degree, Michelle. We also should pay them more so we get the very best. If lawyers and doctors need a degree, then why not police? There you go. Alan says he was a police officer for 30 years. He didn't need a degree then, and he doesn't think people need a degree now. John, you say this is a crazy situation. All of these people being pushed to university. I agree with you. Anyway, look at time, everyone. It flies when you've had fun. John, Ben, thank you. Enjoyed your company tonight. Enjoyed the debate. Thank you at home to you too. Nigel Farage is up next. Good evening, Nigel. What have you got for us?
Well, Michelle, good evening. The whole London-based press pack are after Suella Braverman. They want to force her to resign. It was met by a very spirited response from her in the House of Commons, where she described what was happening in the English Channel as an invasion, a word that I've used myself many times. Our big debate tonight on this show is, should she stay or should she go? All of that in a few minutes. First, though, let's get the all-important weather.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office. The weather stays very changeable during the next 24 hours and beyond. Further spells of rain and showers, windy with that as well. And overnight, we're likely to see some channels across English Channel coasts. An area of low pressure deepening through the evening. Slides along the channel. That's going to bring some very strong winds to northern France. They've named this as a storm. And for the English Channel coast, during the evening and overnight, the winds also strengthen, gales developing, and by the end of the night, the risk of 60 or even 70-mile-per-hour wind gusts for the most exposed southern coasts. Spells of rain also across much of the country. The rain on and off overnight, and it will be heavy at times. But of course, with the wind and the rain, it's not going to be a cold night. 10 or 11 Celsius in many places. But it is a wet and windy start to the day, especially for eastern parts of the UK. Quite quickly, the main area of rain pushes into the Northern Isles, where it sticks around through much of the day, followed very quickly on by showers. And these showers will be frequent, they'll be heavy, especially across the southern half of the UK, accompanied by this gusty wind, rumbles of thunder as well, but some brighter interludes. Northern England, southern Scotland, eastern Scotland likely to see some drier and sunnier weather for a time, but quite quickly the showers across western Scotland, Northern Ireland push through here, and showers continuing into Tuesday night, early hours of Wednesday. Although by the end of the night, I think there will be some clear skies across central and eastern parts of the country, along with lighter winds, and as a result, temperatures